I'm joined by CPA head Micheal Briody. Micheal, can you talk to us about the latest with the CPA? Because you've released a statement and just basically it starts out with the CPA survey shows that any relaxation of social distancing is unlikely to make the resumption of Gaelic Games more likely. Only 57% of club players are willing to return to training before there is a COVID-19 vaccine in place. And among club players, there is little appetite for intercounty action, with only a third prepared to attend county matches. So, even John Horan, the GAA head of the GAA, was on, and he was talking on the Sunday game on Sunday evening. He was talking about there'll be no return until social distancing is discontinued. So, what are your thoughts on it? Even he was talking about July 20 as a sort of a tentative date that has been put forward, and whether there is anything happening GAA wise at that time remains to be seen. He said that date can be reviewed. But from your own point of view, the CPA, what are your thoughts on where we're at?
I suppose initially, Shane, we put out the survey to our members last week, and really what we want to do, coming off the government's announcement the previous week that July would be a date for Gaelic Games return. We got a lot of correspondence back to us saying, are we going to be the guinea pigs, i.e. club players, and saying, well, where's the medical sort of the medical kind of background or whatever to allow this. So we decided to sort of send out the survey to sort of gauge a reaction or to gauge the feeling of the club players. So we got that back. Like we asked, like it wasn't, none of, well, I assume some, but majority of club players wouldn't be qualified to answer questions, be sort of as regards social distancing, vaccines and whatnot. So really what we want to do is, like, given the information we have at this point in time, do they feel comfortable, right? And we used 2020, right? Not knowing all the facts. I suppose the key one is that 57% of players, and only 57% of players, would be prepared to return to action in 2020 if there was a vaccine, right? But that means that there was 22% said definitely no, and another 22% or 21% that are unknown or don't know at this stage. So, and I think it was welcoming to hear John Horan say the other night that he doesn't foresee a return to action until social distancing measures have been relaxed by the government. Whether that happens by July, personally, I think that's quite unlikely, given the sort of the roadmap that has been set out. But I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. But definitely there's an unwillingness of club players to return until they know that it's safe, because quite a few you would see, live with a vulnerable person. Like over a quarter of respondents, and we had over 3,000 respondents, over a quarter of those live with an elderly or vulnerable person from a COVID-19 point of view. So that will kind of tell you the intricacy of club players going back to their families, workplaces, and the network that they would intermingle with. And by playing a club match or training and sort of developing COVID-19 or symptoms of, it can be quite far-reaching, the extent of that.
And just to sort of look at some of the top line results you got from the survey, just read out the bullet points from your own press release. It was, and we've covered some of this ground already. So there was just over 3,000 respondents, 57% are prepared to return to action in 2020, 22% not prepared, 21% don't know, as you said, 61% are prepared to attend club games, whilst only 34% are prepared to attend intercounty games. 27% of club players live with a person over 70 or in an a vulnerable individual, and 64% would train or play if there's temperature checking in place. So do you? I'm just wondering, do you get any sense from players that going back to in 2020 is likely? Because if you're talking about a vaccine in place, there might never be a vaccine for this. Who knows what sort of treatments would be in place? And obviously, I'm not from a medical background, so I'm not even going to sort of theorize on that. But where do you draw a line on some of this stuff? Because ultimately, even if there isn't a vaccine, people will go back playing eventually. Even look at the Bundesliga is going to start back. UFC went back the other night.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, all we want to do was there's a COVID-19 advisory group set up by Croke Park last week, And look, there's no direct club representative on it, but in fairness, there is 4 medics on it on the advisory group, and they're the people that should be listened to around that table. Look, we have forwarded the survey on to Croke Park and asked them to send it on to the advisory group. Tom Ryan confirmed to me today that he would do that. So, I mean, that's as much as we can do with this information. It's to pass on to the experts as they develop the opinions and facts as time goes on, right? You said there, that less people are more inclined to go to an intercounty game. That's by no means saying that obviously that the intercounty game is less than the club game. That's purely down to the fact that there's going to be larger mass gatherings, and people will be more reluctant to go back to larger gatherings than there will be to small ones. So there's no real surprise in that answer. But by and large, it's just trying to marry what are at the moment perceptions of the club player, and as the sort of medical knowledge becomes more known to everyone on how COVID-19, our recovery from it comes, and I think that will be slow, because we are in fear of a second wave of it, or a third wave of it, and that is realistic. So I do think at some stage you are correct in saying they're going to have to bite the bullet, because I don't think we can wait for a vaccine, but people are going to have to evaluate when is the right time. Croke Park, this advisory group, are going to have to advise when is the right time to go back to Gaelic Games. For example, look at juveniles, right? Like your under 10s, your under 12s, anything like. I mean, who's going to decide on that? The parents are going to decide when is that a suitable time to go back. So it doesn't matter if Leo Varadkar or John Horan says we're going back on the 1st of July or the 1st of September. That will be decided by the parents when they think it is safe, right? And no doubt some will consider it safe to go back, some will not, right? There's going to have to be quite flexibility in games if they do come back, and this even goes down to sort of especially in more rural areas. If games do go on and you're in a small parish or a small team and 25% of your players are not prepared to go back because they're living with a vulnerable person, well then can that team field, right? Can we just throw they're going to have to adapt the rule book. You cannot throw them out of the competition. So these are the kind of things we're trying to just I suppose float out there. It's an unenviable task that the COVID advisory group has, and Croke Park themselves and the management committee, because as we all know, this is unprecedented in current times. But all they're going to have to do is use the best knowledge they have to hand, and and as well as that, get the feeling of the people, the masses that is the club players and the club volunteers around the country, and see what they're feeling and what they're prepared to do. And a mix of both will decide when the appropriate start time is for all games.
So last year, I mean, obviously the CPA stepped away from the fixtures task force review, and now as you've just mentioned there, the advisory group, there's no CPA representation on that. Are you a bit concerned that the average club player who's been talked about going back playing before the intercounty player, that the club player is not being represented here? Is there something you'd ask of the GAA to sort of, solve that situation?
Well, it is disappointing there's no direct club player representative, certainly, whether that's sort of linked to, our decision last year to pull away from the task force group. I suppose what we've proved in that we're not yes men. We're not sort of people who are just going to kind of accept a decision and go with the flow if we don't think it's right. We called it out. We couldn't agree to it in good conscience. But that's gone. That still hasn't been sort of kind of put to bed from the point of view the task force work still has to be brought to the next stage. At the moment, it's only lying on a shelf, to some degree understandable with the pandemic that exists. But I suppose, in fairness, the people that are on the group are all from clubs, right? They're all GAA people, and I don't for 1 minute think that Croke Park will sort of ignore, the risks to club players and the feelings of club players. They cannot, to really start to make this work, they really have to know what the feelings are in each club, and they say they have a good handle, and look, we'll just have to see how that materialises and whether that can be emanated back up through club secretaries, club chairman.
Do you feel that there's there was talk of a cut-off point for championships going ahead, that rather than, like, if it gets to a certain point, maybe January or February, that the GAA might just say, right, we're going to have to do without a 2020 All-Ireland Championship in hurling and football, and that it might not be played at a later date. You know, traditionally, even if you go back to 1920, that championship would have been finished in 1922 and so on. What about the situation for the club championship? Have you had any discussions, any interactions in terms of what happens to the club championship? Is it even a case whereby if intercounty goes back in October, for example, the best case scenario, if it does, and the club championships go back in August, we'll say, or even July, as has been talked about, is there a situation whereby it'll be county championships only, and provincial championships will be forgotten about, and the All Ireland series will be forgotten about this year? Have any discussions like that happened between you and the GAA, or have you heard anything from them?
No, we haven't heard of anything really at all since we pulled away from the task force, anything officially, apart from a few anecdotal sort of emails between myself and one or other of them. So no, there's been no direct correspondence on any of that. Look, I mean, what will happen? I mean, it's been floated around there more in the media than anything on the various different options. But in fairness to the fixture making bodies in Croke Park, it's nigh on impossible to set it out until you have a start date. Certainly, if the best case scenario, if club can start back in July and intercounty in October, both will have to be abbreviated versions of what would normally happen. If they don't happen, and then you want to look at 2020 and you want to try and get the 2020, or sorry, 21, if you want to look at the 2020 and try and run two years into one, absolute madness, because there's not enough area there's not enough space in the calendar at the moment to run 1 year. So how are you going to get 2 years? So look, I think there's 4 to 6 weeks here that the GAA have an opportunity to work with the HSE and the relevant bodies and decide what Gaelic Games will look like at the back end of the year, considering the social distancing will or will not be in place, right? And if they're not happy that can happen, well, then they need to sort of come out with a level of certainty to all club players and intercounty players within that sort of 4 to 6 week period, I think, and say, look, there was going to be no games or there are going to be games, because they should have as much information as possible at that stage. And that they're going to sort of spend that time looking at reviewing the calendar then for 21, which is what they really kind of need to do. In any case, it should be happening from the beginning of the year, from January through to when there was supposed to be a special Congress to deal with in September. That work still has to be done, but now there will be more attention paid to it. There will be more bandwidth available for them to spend real time looking at that. But in fairness, I really think that the next 4 to 6 weeks is that key period on when they've got to decide, is there going to be any games in 2020 or not.
Thanks very much, Micheal.
Okay, thank you.